Standard Bank is one of South Africa's big four banks with a market cap of 181 billion rand. It has a 150-year history in South Africa and since 1990 has built operations in 17 countries across the African continent, where it also trades as Stanbic Bank. It is held, 20% is held by ICBC of China and has a price to earnings ratio of 15. So Paul, let's kick off with you and Standard Bank. We know that it's burnt, has experienced a little bit of negativity in other emerging markets, but in Africa it's still looking good.
Big shift in strategy in the last 2 years. So prior to that, it was looking to go global. Look, the roots of Standard Bank are in the African continent as a whole. But at some point along the line, Standard Chartered and Standard Bank separated. Standard Bank then focused on South Africa exclusively, and Standard Chartered, we know, wandered off into Asia and elsewhere. Standard Bank then decided in 1990, as you pointed out, to start kind of reintegrating with the African continent outside of South Africa, so they began this process. But the interesting thing about them is that unlike some of their competitors who've just gone and sort of set up branches or rep offices or sort of opened a office in a downtown, capital elsewhere, they have actually gone the step of creating and registering licenses in each and every country, which then have to be capitalized. So it's a brave move, but they're doing it properly, and I predict they'll be the biggest in due to come.
Okay, so Craig, when I look at the cost to income ratios across the African continent, we're looking at very high levels here, and this has been one of the biggest issues in expansion onto the African continent. Is cost is very high because expansion is expensive, infrastructure is expensive.
So cost is the one issue, but of course if you can still get those great margins, then cost doesn't become as big an issue. And if you look at their results, they looked at about 23% increase in profit to December overall, but 38% of it came from Africa. So you're getting better margins, even though you do have that issue with cost. Some people are prepared to pay more. Perhaps it's got something to do with competition in those markets and the offering. So I think from that point of view, Standard Bank, it's great that they've gone back to their core and focusing on Africa. They had those operations in Russia and Argentina, and to be honest, when they got rid of them, and it didn't look like a really good sell in terms of what they paid for it, one questioned it. But I think perhaps the strategy's got a lot to do with their 20% China shareholder, and I wouldn't be surprised that that's the reason that they made it very clear that their focus is only on the African continent.
Okay,
they're not interested outside of it.
Okay, so this 20% ICBC stake, we always question, how is it working to Standard Bank's favor? What kind of synergies do we actually see? Can you quantify that?
Well, I think you do. The Chinese want to be a big player in resources in Africa, so they helped facilitate that transaction where Metarex, which was Standard Bank backed and Standard Bank funded, was basically bailed out and bought by Jinshuan, which is a Chinese corporation. So those are the kind of deals you could see. You could see also deals where infrastructure projects in these countries get funded by Chinese in exchange for business opportunities, and Standard Bank gets involved as a co-financier. So there are those kinds of things. I don't think necessarily, though, that the Chinese are going to adopt a short-term view. They never do. They're always looking for the long-term perspective. So I expect they want to follow Standard Bank into these countries like Angola, where they've set up shop properly, like Nigeria and so on and so forth. So I fully expect Standard Bank to look for opportunities to do all those trade finance and forex and stuff involving the Chinese, but also really just simply to do the basic banking thing, but do it properly. So the full suite of corporate banking and retail, because that's where the margins are with 800 to 1 billion people in retail banking and lending in Africa is going to be huge over the next couple of decades.
There's huge growth potential, Craig, when you look at the penetration in Africa. It's relatively low. So again, just tapping into that consumer, African consumer is rising quite rapidly. Again, this is just great opportunity, but in the same breath, within these economies which Stanbic operates and Standard Bank operates in Africa, we're seeing a lot of competition, so it's not easy right now on the ground. Craig. Okay. Unfortunately, we have a bit of an issue there with the sound, so you can tackle that one, Paul,
but just
for
to
us.
pick up on that, yes, exactly. Plenty of competition. Remember, what happened for one reason or another in many of these countries is they've got a plethora of banks. If you go to Zimbabwe, there are like 25 banks If you go to Nigeria, similarly, like 50 banks. If you
Kenya,
look
it's the same across Africa.
and I think it's because, for one reason or another, the regulatory regime was quite loose. So people wanted to be a bank. Sure, you can be a bank. You know, you're involved in industry and you've got a trade premise and you're looking to just, yeah, sure, come bank. South Africa, much tighter with regard to the rules, with regard to capitalization, which has encouraged big banks rather than small ones. So we'll have to see how it unfolds. There are some African banks which are very exciting. EcoBank, which is, you know, based in Nigeria and in Togo, looks like a great play for the sort of thing. So it's not as though the South Africans have it all their way.
Okay, so Hot, I know that your banking play is African Bank, but what, Hot or not
Yeah,
for
I
you,
do
Standard
quite like
Bank, PE
African
of
Bank,
15.
and I think it's due for a bit of a leadership renewal. I think Jack Emery will probably be retiring in the next couple of years, and I think that's a positive. And as I say, they've really done it properly. I think the asset class, which is global banks, a bit of a cloud at the moment, and that keeps me away, but I'm prepared to give it the sort of muted hot.
Muted Hot.
Yes.
Okay.
Lukewarm, you know,
Well,
the
that's great. We
favorite.
just make things up here on Hot Stocks.